if we're talking about hard sets per exercise, what are
Yes.
you averaging, let's say, per exercise? And does it change depending on, of course, the body part you're trying to improve or the exercise itself?
Typically, I have a resounding top set only is my failure set. I've trained every which way, lots of sets that are like 3 sets at 9%. There's a little bit of a mental accomplishment for me when I'm like, okay, I have 3 sets on exercise, and that first set for me is like a proprioceptive set, and I'm just aware of the fundamental movement and the contraction. The second set is a working set, but it's not going to be something that provides any progression. I'm going to get definitely warm on it. That final set is usually the set that I'm sending it on. But I can't hit multiple sets if I'm really going to push an RPE, 9 or 10. Probably not going to get under that weight and do that again. That's always worked well for me mentally. There's been a couple exercises. I think in my head there was a Larson bench press, which is like straight out bench press that I had in there. That was 3 sets of 8 at that time. But that was probably the only exercise in which I had those multiple like 90% sets. But I typically train with that top set only approach, where that is the set where I'm shooting for progressive overload, and then the next week I'm putting more weight on the bar.
Oh, interesting. So basically, you will increase the load appropriately each set until you get to that top set. You'll hit that
Yes.
to failure, and then you'll move on to the
Yes.
next exercise.
Correct.
Oh, okay. So it's really from what I'm hearing, it's like if we're talking about a traditional high intensity training approach, sounds like that's what it is. I mean, aside from maybe the frequency of what's traditionally has been, we'll say, advocated, aside from Dorian Yates, who's advocated or not advocated, but did himself a 4 time per week frequency for the most part. Were you inspired by that to some degree, like a Dorian Yates, blood and guts, high intensity training? Is that what inspired this approach? DC training? What was it specifically where you landed on this?
I would say, looking back after all these years, that was definitely one of the training styles that just came most naturally for me. So it was maybe a little bit more time intensive, where I just felt like I wasn't taking these 3, 4, 5 minute rest times like a power lifter. That was cognitively very difficult for me always to just sit around. But yeah, I can get more work done in a short period of time, and I feel like I can still make progressions. That final set being my complete failure set was inspired, I would say, by Dorian Yates high intensity training more than maybe any other individual, if I was to look back.
How many exercises would you say a typical workout might have? Well, I know they're all different, but let's just say, let's take an example, like your full upper day. What does that look like? Because we know it's 1 top set to failure.
Yes.
Like that's what you're working up towards. What's that sweet spot for you as far as total exercises in a given workout with this approach?
Maybe if it is a full upper day, we're probably around 7 exercises for like 4 sets each.
And 4 sets each, that's, again, building up to that top set.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. So basically like 1 all-out set.
Correct.
And is that typical for all workouts, like seven exercises you find is kind of where it's at? Or is there like a range typically where you're tapping out? Or
I would say 6 or 7. 6 probably if I'm doing like an upper push day, it'd probably be 6. And then upper pull day, I'd probably have 6. But if I'm telling a full upper day, I'd probably have 7, or a full lower day would probably have 7. If I do a quad based day, that'll be probably around 5 or 6. And then same thing with hammies and glutes. So if I have a multiple muscle group day, I'll probably have an additional exercise in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like we were talking about, again, about the upper day, it's like you throw laterals, a bicep, a tricep, 4 compounds, and there's your 7 exercises.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, standard. Let's talk about the upper body now. Let's talk about the changes that you're going to be implementing upper body as far as the frequency. Like how often are you training your upper body now relative to before? Like, is it the same and you just reduce the lower body, or how does that look?